As I understand it, the world is going through a fascinating transition from an old order to a new order. The transition itself might take decades as we go through it. The signs of that transition is the rise of China to the second biggest economy in the world. But China is still, I think, less than 10% of the global economy. The United States is still over 25% of the global economy. And so what we are witnessing, as you correctly point out, is let's call it transfer in influence and transfer in economic status from old powers to new powers, something that we saw around World War II between the United Kingdom and the United States as well. Secondly, there's a trend line which you again accurately capture, and that is, as one economist calls it, yesterday's creditors are today's debtors. In other words, those who lent money yesterday are borrowing money today. And those who used to borrow money are the ones who are lending money. And so that's another transition that is actually taking place. And all of this means that many countries around the world are beginning to recognize that they are losing their old influence, that they have to grapple with new power relations, and will do so in various ways in order to protect their own position and also ensure that the advance of others doesn't undermine them.
Mr. Vavi, then on the back of that, the question becomes, is this group of 20 so-called influential economies really relevant? Because some of the people perhaps don't have what is required to coordinate and assist as we try to get this global economy back on track.
Well, there can be no doubt that the group of 20 is a very, very powerful institution that have been created by the leaders of the countries that make up the group of 20. And so you can't say it is irrelevant because it has failed to tackle some of the pertinent challenges that are facing humankind across the globe. It is relevant. It is a very powerful institution that no country can afford to ignore. It does impose some roles on the global economy that you can hardly ignore. And even though they, in their communique, say that they will allow space based on the domestic situation of each and every country, but at the end of the day, what they say and what they dictate to tend to influence not only the members of the G20, but the rest of the countries in the globe.
Because I think the reason why people are asking the relevance, at least maybe they should ask the relevance or question the relevance of some of the members, given what the minister is also admitting, that the problem with it is that some of them really do not have the historic financial muscle that they once had. So you can have people talking, for instance, about the reflation of the world economy, but actually they do not have the finances and the cash to do so.
The minister is correct in saying that there is a huge shift that is happening in the world today. The power relations in economic terms is fast shifting to the developing countries, which are the only nations that are growing at this particular moment. China has become the second largest economy in the world, and it is predicted that if this trend continues by 2020 or 2025, it will replace the United States of America and that it will be the biggest economy in the world. So yes, the yesterday's fellows who were very powerful are no longer as powerful as they used to be. But nevertheless, the relevance of the G20 must not be based on who have what financial muscle. Must be about confronting the challenges that are facing the people all over the world. And the biggest challenge that we face at this moment is the crisis of deepening unemployment, deepening inequalities within and between the nations, as well as poverty that goes with that. And the G20 in their communique says that this is going to be their preoccupation, that they do acknowledge that that this is the biggest challenge. And we're sort of happy that even as they working themselves out of the recession or the threatened double-dip recession, but they are at least focusing on what we think the world should focus on. But we will quibble about whether the instruments they are choosing are the correct one, whether, for example, fiscal consolidation will ever take us into the route of decent employment opportunities for the unemployed youth of today. We will say no, but at least the fact that they're saying to all their member countries as well as to every other economy in the world, we've got to be prioritizing job creation at this moment. It was very, very important. We're quite pleased about that statement at least.
But Lebohang, the issue is, and I think this is the test, is whether or not they can put their money where their mouth is. Because if you look at 2008 in London, for instance, they were able then to say, given the financial crisis at the time, they put in about $5 trillion US, and they were able to put the money to deal with these things. But here they're identifying unemployment, inequalities, joblessness, and so on. But are they able to put in the money?
Well, the point is the thing with the G20 is that it follows the same kind of template of the global governance structure and the international finance structure, which is very much market-driven. It speaks the same language around, although it speaks about ensuring market transparency, investing in infrastructure, and most importantly, financial taxes, transactional financial taxes. It then goes on to bring into place the same kind of arguments which have been found very wanting at WTO level, for example. Gleneagles, some people call this Gleneagles II. Gleneagles was marked by a lot of extremely extravagant promises, which were actually rehashes of previous summits. And we've seen that most governments have not managed to even honor those very modest pledges. So indeed, in terms of putting money where mouths are, the G20 has been found over the last few years to be rather unreliable in that regard. I think that any modicum of robustness of this particular summit, these particular discussion, were to do with a level of great self-preservation, particularly of European and the U.S. markets, because, of course, they are markets in great crisis, possibly markets in decline, as previous speakers, the Minister and Mr. Vavi have noted that certainly the future lies with the East and certainly with Africa in years to come. So there was a huge level of trying to salvage their own markets and the contagion that is taking place there. And to a great extent, for that reason, any level of progressive articulation was linked to that. But it certainly was not so much about a global agenda, and it certainly wasn't per se about a pro-Africa agenda, and any benefits that we may derive from these discussions are purely incidental.
Let me read some SMSs here and see if I can get some answers from my guests. Somebody says, in fact, it's Joe in Pietermaritzburg, who says the G20 missed the golden opportunity to take a turn to the left and are under hallucination that they can patch up the evil system of capitalism. There's an SMS as well from AB in Port Elizabeth who says the West will recover and will always be the powerhouse of the world. Wishful thinking from anti-West ANC comrades. Joel in Port Elizabeth says, does this failure to find a solution to the crisis not show the ineffectiveness of the G20 to influence world events? Spio in KZN says, other than a poor excuse to get out of political pressure these leaders face at home, this summit was nothing other than a useless talk shop with no teeth. Another one from Tony in Cape Town says, G20 haven't heard a thing, but I'm sure it was the same old talk shop. And that's the kind of feeling then that's coming out of my SMSs here, Minister.
No, I think citizens are well within their rights to make those sorts of observations. But what might be very useful is for as many people as possible to get onto the website, get hold of the full communique of the G20, and look at the range of issues that were dealt with. Now, amongst them, as Mr. Vavi was pointing out, was a strategy for growth and jobs. And we've come a long way in the last 18 months in trying to bring about some convergence in understanding on issues like multipolarity, the role of the African continent. We've still got more persuading to do, but we certainly have made some progress. The importance of employment, particularly for young people, and for business, labor, and government to cooperate in that regard. The importance of development. Remember, we had a high-level panel which reported on 11 projects, infrastructure projects. It took a year's work to get that going. It was initiated by our Korean colleagues. In addition to that, we've looked at agriculture, we looked at food price volatility, the dangers of protectionism, and the importance of reinstituting some strength in the multilateral trade arena. In the financial reforms area, I think there was some dilution post-2008, but nonetheless, today you do have global norms and standards for big financial institutions, and although slow, some of those norms and standards are going to make a big difference as we go forward.
Sure.
There's a huge attention given to tax havens and how they inhibit resource mobilization. And this is very important for developing countries and the African continent, because much of our money is taken away by multinational corporations in one form or another, or by corrupt politicians and officials on the other hand.
Yeah.
So I can go on and on.